Hi, my name is Alex Williams, founder of The New Stack, and you're listening to the New Stack Analyst Podcast, a show about application, development, and management at scale. Thanks for joining us. We'd like to thank our sponsors from the Pancake Breakfast at CloudNativeCon in Seattle, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. Inspired by internet-scale computing, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation advances the development of cloud-native technology and services by creating a new set of common container technologies informed by technical merit and end-user value. CoreOS. CoreOS has a mission to improve the security and reliability of the internet. Wercker, a Docker-native CI/CD automation platform for Kubernetes and microservices deployments. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to KubeCon and the kickoff to the next few days, which are going to be very exciting. My name's Alex Williams. I'm founder and editor-in-chief of The New Stack, and this is the Pancake Breakfast. And we do Pancake Breakfasts around the world now. And what we basically do is we bring our Pancake robot Stacky, and we print pancakes, and we actually serve pancakes at a much faster rate in the back. But we're printing the Space Needle over here, so if you ask a question, you get a Space Needle pancake. So I would first like to thank our sponsors today for really making this possible. And so I'd like to thank the CNCF, CoreOS, and Wercker. Give a big hand of applause to these folks. They really... They make this possible. And so the topic for our discussion today is Kubernetes in production and what customers are saying about it. And so really that's going to be the focus, of my questions here. But before I do that, I'd like to just say a little bit about the companies that we have up here. We have the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. I'm going to let Dan talk a little bit more about that. But in my view, the role of the CNCF is really to advance the development of this new world of microservices architectures, this new world of scale-out ecosystems, and they're doing a fantastic job in helping bring all these different groups together and helping think through on how these deployment patterns work and so on. We also have CoreOS, and CoreOS we've known for quite a long time, and we know Alex Polvi just from other days as well, and they're really, I'll let Alex again explain what they do, but they're really about securing the internet, and I think it's a really interesting story, kind of relates to Kubernetes and microservices and how microservices really kind of, correlate to all those more traditional architectures that we've seen over the years. And then we have Wercker, and Wercker is, I first met Mies, the founder of Wercker, I think at GopherCon a few years ago, and we had a fantastic conversation, and they're now sponsoring the event, and Wercker really is a Docker-native CI/CD environment. They automate the platform for Kubernetes and microservices deployments. So let's just get started right now. I'll say who we have. We have Dan Kohn of the CNCF. We have Erik St. Martin of Comcast. We have Alex Polvi on the far side of CoreOS. And we have Andy Smith of Wercker. So I also just want to say one thing before we get started. The New Stack just launched today an ebook on use cases for Kubernetes. And this it was written by Johnny Kiram, MSV, who just did a brilliant job with it. He really covers the space thoroughly, really gives a good, I think it's technical enough for people in this room, but also a good overview for folks, and so I encourage you to go to the New Stack and download it. It's an excellent resource. I'm very proud of it. So I just want to get started and just kind of set the tone, Dan. The CNCF plays a big role in this event here, right? And you guys really help make this possible. But what is it you see as your role now? You know, what is happening in this world, in the scale out ecosystems that really brings you here, and really what are you trying to achieve over these next few days, and you know, what is the state of this ecosystem in your view?
Thanks, Alex, and thanks everybody for coming. This is the first ever CloudNativeCon in addition to being KubeCon. And I've just been executive director for 5 months, so this is also my first big event where we're able to get everyone together. And I'm thrilled with the progress in the community where we've now been able to pull together several big projects. So Kubernetes and Prometheus and Open Tracing, and as I'll spoil my keynote in a second, we just, okay, thanks for that. We just got the vote for FluentD last night. So what we have are these different projects that are all considered best in class and that are all popular on their own and have communities behind them. But what we're trying to do is to stitch those together and draw a picture of a comprehensive open source stack that allows people to deploy modern applications onto any cloud and every cloud. And that vision is something that obviously you can see with the sellout turnout here is really catching on. I would say that over the last year or two, we've definitely been progressing up the hype curve, if you're all familiar with that. But one of the incredibly exciting things about the tracks that we have here are to see actual customers in production. And I would point to Comcast, and I'll hand it off to him, that real people are generating revenue on this today that I think maybe my favorite story, just because my young boys were so much more impressed by my job, was being able to say that Pokemon Go is running on Kubernetes. But, and then I'll also just make a quick plea to folks here, where when we set up the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, it has 3 tiers to it. So a technical oversight committee of top architects, and then we have a governing board, which is really run by the vendors, and we have an end user board that we haven't really filled out, and that is my top priority for the rest of the year, to get a great group of companies together and individuals that are diverse across every possible dimension. So small and big, what cloud they're running on internationally, the kind of workloads, what kinds of applications they are. And so for each of you, if you have interesting Kubernetes use cases, I would love to hear about them. And as I'll talk about in my keynote in an hour, we're drastically dropping the price of that end user membership to just make it really easy to participate, and also to try and create a collaborative environment for folks to share stories about running Kubernetes and these other technologies in production.
Great. So I just want to, I want to just ask everyone in the audience to please, if you have a question, just raise your hand. We have Joe Jackson, the managing editor, really the co-host for the event here, who will give you a mic. This is such an early time, Erik, isn't it? I mean, we were talking just beforehand about how early we are, and you're really starting to, to embrace Kubernetes. But you said something very interesting that I thought. You talked about the primitives, right? And really and when you began working with Kubernetes in its very, very early stages, correct? And you were thinking, why? Why would I do this? But then you started looking at the primitives and you realized there's different things you could do. Can you tell us a little bit about, what you are doing with Kubernetes? What is the infrastructure that you're using? And just some of the challenges and some of the outcomes that you're seeing.
Yeah, sure. So initially with this project, we were looking at it, so specifically, and I'll talk about this in my keynote too, spoiler. So we're using it to stream linear video, so cable that comes into your house. So there's a couple of complexities with the way we do that, with networking constraints and things like that, where the streams are located, because they need to be located as close to the house to minimize bandwidth across the backbone. And we had a couple of different constraints like that, where when we were looking at something like Kubernetes to deploy the multiplexing software, it was going to be, it felt like it was kind of against the grain, that this wasn't really what Kubernetes was for. And it wasn't until we started to look at if we had to develop our own system from scratch, like say using Zookeeper and creating like a homogeneous pool of workers, and you start to realize the complexity in building something like that from scratch, and you think to yourself like, okay, well, what can we leverage that already exists? We want to focus on our core business, and you start realizing like much of that already exists in Kubernetes. So we started kind of looking at what pieces specifically were preventing us from being able to use it. And really it came down to, in February, they announced kind of like the third-party resources, and we started thinking about leveraging those and thinking about the primitives and the way Kubernetes works, which at a basic level is you have a resource that you submit to the cluster, and it represents a desired state, and all the components within Kubernetes are just serving their purpose to reconcile the cluster towards that state. So we started trying to look at replicating that model and just leveraging the things that exist there. So we ended up with this model, and it'll be easier with diagrams. So during my talk, I'll go through kind of how we use third-party resources, and we kind of have our own controller that determines the actual Kubernetes objects that need to be created in order to deploy the specific channel lineup to the desired location. So, I mean, as far as like networking, and we've had some stuff with like, we had real-time thread constraints and things. So we've had a little bit of stuff, but all in all, I mean, fixing those problems was far simpler than what we would have had to create from scratch to do kind of our own orchestration of these video streams out to our clusters.
Okay, great. I have a question for the audience. How many people are actually using Kubernetes in production? Wow, nice. How many people are trying it out right now? Wow, it's practically the whole room. Anybody want to? Anybody who's using it in production, raise your hand. Do you have a question here for the audience at all? Anything you'd like to share? All right, we'll get back to you. Alex, so you've seen the meteoric rise of Kubernetes, haven't you? I mean, and I'm curious on how you think about how, you know, how do companies who are using it in production manage it and can kind of keep up with everything? I mean, there's like, we had a previous Pancake breakfast where there was a discussion about the tyranny of choice, right? And all the different possible options out there. So how do you approach that when you're talking to people in the community?
Sure. So it's been an amazing, really 3.5 years. I mean, before we get into the choice, let's just all reflect for a moment. Like 3.5 years ago, like, Docker was just a talk at a meetup. Kubernetes was a twinkle in some Googler's eye, right? Like it's been a crazy couple years in terms of all this happening, and now it's real and exists, and so much so that we have a problem of like, what do we actually choose for networking? What do we do for storage? How do we turn on this configuration and that? And I think over time, what will happen is you'll see these best practices just emerge, and kind of the chaos that's going on right now is because of the emergence of the space. And if you put a group of architects in a room that are solid, well experienced architects, they'll come out to roughly the same solutions over and over again in terms of the way to approach
like what?
These problems. Basic examples. How do you set up a replication on a database? Right. Or how do you do multi-master HA across a control plane on Kubernetes without downtime and upgrading it under load? There's only like so many ways you could actually do that in a way that makes sense. I think an example of where you're starting to see kind of things coalesce is Kubernetes itself in terms of orchestration. Like I believe this event and kind of this moment in time is really where Kubernetes on the container management piece is going ahead, and I don't think that there's going to be a lot of different options. I think it's going to be similar to what we saw with Linux and what we saw with even things like OpenStack, where you see kind of these category-defining pieces of open source software really grab hold. There'll be choice, don't get me wrong, there's always choice, but in terms of where the ecosystem goes in general. And I think right now is that moment for Kubernetes, and I think you'll see the peak confusion, which we were at probably a little earlier this year, start to come down.
Are we at peak confusion?
I think we might have passed peak confusion.
Really?
I think we might have passed peak confusion.
I think Bryan Cantrill would disagree with you there.
Yeah,
I think he would say
I think it's settling out.
We're still reaching.
I think the Kubernetes kind of pulling ahead and kind of taking the whole category is one that is definitely helping.
I have a poll. Has Kubernetes reached peak confusion? Is it peaked past peak confusion? Raise your hand.
What does that actually mean, Alex? What are you trying to say?
That's what polls are for. You got to interpret it yourself. Or have we quite reached peak confusion yet? Or okay, all right. I know my questions make absolutely no sense. So go on. You have anything else to say?
Well, I'm just gonna say, I mean, another way to phrase that question is like, is the mass amount of the community still confused, like which container orchestration technology to use? Is that like confusing, or like is it unclear? And I'd say right now it's a lot more clear than it was like a year ago, for instance.
Well, okay. So the consensus is around Kubernetes, so you say.
That's what I believe. Yes.
That's what you believe. Okay. Well, okay. There's other questions I could ask related to Kubernetes and other orchestrators. Who's using a different orchestrator besides Kubernetes? Yeah, there are a few ones. What are you using? Okay. Anyone else? ECS. Okay. Anyone else?
I'd like to call out that we see a lot of this stuff in the field too, Mesos and ECS. Like CoreOS Linux, our Linux distribution is used in all of those environments, and they're definitely out there. I just think as the community matures around kind of a open source de facto one, that's where I see things going with Kubernetes.
Could I just point out that if you've had containers in production for more than 2 years, then by definition you were using Mesos, because that was your own.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely.
And so in a lot of ways, I think the most interesting question is new deployments that are going out.
Definitely.
And my impression is that Amazon ECS is either one or two, because they're just obviously Amazon has tons of customers.
Yeah.
And the lowest mental overhead process is to just say, oh, I'll add in this 40th Amazon service on top of everything.
100% agree. 100% agree.
So Andy, what's your view? What's your view of the landscape out there right now? Why does Wercker taking the approach that it does? What is it that you're seeing out there that there's a real need for the to resolve? What are the complexities that you're seeing that people are trying to resolve?
Well, we're definitely very excited about Kubernetes. It solved a lot of our specific problems as users. But our use cases are pretty much the same as all of our users' use cases. We need to deploy things often and easily, do things like rolling updates and stuff like this. These are all things that where previously you had to get some people in a room, and again, they come to the same, as Alex said, they all come to the same solution as to how to do it. Luckily, Kubernetes has just sort of rolled it up and made it a standard practice. You don't even think about how to configure it at this point. You just say deploy, like apply your deployment, and then everything just sort of solves itself. This is something that our users also need, our customers also need. They need to frequently update their deployments. We sort of espouse this, do everything often so that you know it works. Don't do it once per week, because sometimes it might fail. If you do it every day, if you do it every couple minutes, probably you're pretty sure that code path's going to work. So do it often, and Kubernetes definitely takes all the pain out of that. So we've been sort of doubling down ourselves on targeting customers who are specifically using Kubernetes. We think it's the strong horse in this race as far as container stuff goes.
Okay, so it's a strong horse in the race. Okay, so I want to move over to like the ease of use for Kubernetes. And Erik, I'm curious on your perspective here. We in the ebook we talked about version 1.4, and there's some new tools there that make the installation a lot easier on machines running CentOS and Ubuntu, for example, right? So customers, and we write that customers can get a fully functional cluster running in just 4 steps. Is that, would you agree with that? Is that just like wishful thinking? What are the nuances here that are more appropriate?
Well, first you have to create the universe.
Okay. Yes, exactly. Yeah. How do you make apple pie, right?
So I'll agree with each release of Kubernetes. It seems to be getting easier for deployments, and I'm really happy that this is starting to become a thing. I know Kismatic just released kind of an enterprise toolkit that's supposed to have some scripts to help do that. I know that CoreOS is working on some stuff for doing rolling updates. So it seems like we're collectively evolving this. But until now, I mean, it's been a lot of people with their own RPM builds, their own Ansible scripts or Puppet or Chef deployments and things. And even ourselves, we're in that world right now. We're doing Ansible out, and we know that long term, going across the entire country, that's not sustainable. So I'm really excited about these things, but I can't really speak to using these for deployments because we haven't used this new functionality. But I mean, I'm hopeful that we'll continue to evolve and see this get easier.
So part of the complexity, Dan, comes in like, in my view at least, is like Kubernetes can run on premise, it can run on Google Compute Engine, it can run AWS, and now Azure, right? Like, so how is the CNCF going to be supporting, across these multiple distributions?
I'll give a quick shout out to two other hosting company members, Pancake, which is a bare metal as a service in New York, and I'll be announcing in an hour.
You're a New Yorker, so you're just talking to your hometown
but
friends.
And my other New Yorker, both of these are conveniently 10 blocks from my office downtown. But DigitalOcean, it will be announcing momentarily, is also joining as a member. And definitely the magic or the promise of Kubernetes and just more generally of cloud-native computing is that you should be able to select your platform and select the projects that you're using, both for orchestration but also for logging and monitoring and tracing and all the other pieces that we're going to be adding in. And then you should be able to go select your cloud. And I think we could all agree that we haven't quite reached that yet, that it still is a little too hard. I mean, there's an insanely active Slack channel around Kubernetes running on AWS.
Really?
And there's just tons of really thoughtful disagreements and arguments on what best practices are. But what's great is that there's a real commonality in a community that's working together to try and define those and to compare approaches. And I think you're going to see over the coming months that they reach some consensus. We're thrilled with Brendan Burns now at Microsoft, and they're making the announcement yesterday that I think you're going to see similar work on Azure, and them also open sourcing some of the underlying pieces that allow people to actually go in and fix bugs themselves. So I'll just give a quick shout out to a project that I launched a couple months ago. It's on GitHub. I call it a marketing demo so as to not try and oversell it, but you can find it github.com/CNCF/demo. And what we did is pick 3 kind of interesting workloads. So we'll do a Google Analytics clone in Node.js called Countly with MongoDB as a backend. We have a distributed computing client called Boink that's working on an IBM project to try and find a cure for the Zika virus. And then we're working with Greg Crowe-Hartman on doing distributed kernel compiles. And we have it working today on the CNCF community cluster, which is a 1,000-node, $15 million infrastructure that Intel made available to us. And I do want to also mention that that's available to all open source projects that want to make a request, either CNCF or not. And then it's also working on Amazon Web Services today. But if you can go in, it's on all an open source project. We're happy to take pull requests. But our goal is to get that identical demo running on GCP, or GKE, probably GCP, Azure, DigitalOcean, Pancake, and then to be able to accept pull requests from any other hosting company to demonstrate the fact that you can have identical workloads, identical platform on lots of different clouds.
Let's take a quick break and get back to the show.
We'd like to thank our sponsors from the Pancake Breakfast at CloudNativeCon in Seattle, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. Inspired by internet scale computing, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation advances the development of cloud native technology and services by creating a new set of common container technologies informed by technical merit and end user value. CoreOS. CoreOS has a mission to improve the security and reliability of the internet. Wercker, a Docker native CI/CD automation platform for Kubernetes and microservices deployments. So we have a pancake to give out of the Space Needle. Who has a question for the audience? I mean, for the panel, not for the audience, but the audience too, I guess. About complexities you're facing. Come on, we got to give out one Space Needle. There we go. Okay, great. Right over here. The man with the Mickey Mouse code. Is that what it is? Yeah, something like that. Can you just say your name and who you're with?
My name is Justin. I work at Disney.
Great.
And just curious what the CNCF has for any focus on more on-premises or bare metal stuff. I mean, you talk a lot about choosing your cloud. It's like, but a lot of companies and enterprises aren't choosing clouds. They're running in-house, and there's been lots of complexities of standing up Kubernetes on-prem, and I see a lot of movement for Kubernetes to move things towards that, and CoreOS has done a great job with a lot of their tools to get some of that in place. But I feel like for the CNCF, it is cloud native, but it's still a missed market that isn't being focused on.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a little bit of a hole in our stack, and but I think that's more around the fact that there's a little bit of still of a lack of consensus of what is the best initial deployment to get your Kubernetes cluster up and running on bare metal. And so if you look in at the CNCF demo, we chose Ansible just because it was widely available and we could sort of get it up and running quickly. And the idea of the demo is to demonstrate best practices, but I think we're much less confident that that is the solution going forward. I guess I'd be curious on Alex's view on this, because I think a lot of folks are using CoreOS on bare metal to run Kubernetes.
Yeah, we've been working with you on it to make Kubernetes accessible really in all environments and do it in a way that's consistent and reliable and manageable and kind of everything. Because that's really the promise of all this stuff, is that we have an environment that works consistently between bare metal environment, our cloud infrastructure, really wherever we want it. And so we have invested in the bare metal work, and we will continue to. It's core to both our open source and the commercial products that we're building around Tectonic, but it's also just a void right now in the space. And on any of the software that we go and build, we try to work into that void. And I think it's a very astute observation, because it's something that needs to get better. But we've come a long way in the last the last 6 months or so. We made a ton of progress on this, and now you can go do fully ephemeral, like Pixie booted infrastructure on bare metal pretty easily. It's gotten quite sophisticated, like delivering on that dream of just like push some buttons and the machines come online. It's never always that easy, but it's getting pretty close to that, which is tremendously better than what kind of bare metal infrastructure management looked like before.
So Andy, what are the complexities then in the configuration then that you see when that you see customers have with with Kubernetes? There's the underlying VMs that kind of sit above the physical hardware itself, and is there a configuration management complexity in that?
I think everybody is moving very rapidly towards designing their software for sort of immutable architecture. We're using containers now. We're using things like Kubernetes. Our services are defined as things that communicate via the ways that, for example, Kubernetes lets you describe services. So that stuff has all become very straightforward. So as far as the complexities there, I think that's why we have been moving to this platform. And our development practices are catching up. So I've heard Ansible mentioned a couple times here. That's almost like a bad word at our office. The idea that you're going to like go touch a server is terrible to us. We want to talk to APIs, and that's it. And that's what our customers want to do, and that's where we're designing software now for. So config management is, for us, it still exists somewhat. We use CoreOS as well, so we have a cloud init file and some extra machinations around that. But that basically just turns on Kubernetes on a cluster, on a node. And so that's the last time we touch that server. And that I think it should be how everybody's last time they touch a server is turning on Kubernetes on it and then letting it run. Everything else from then on should be through APIs. So the idea that something could go wrong on a server and we're going to fix it is very weird to me compared to just getting a new server. And that's what sort of cloud has promised and Kubernetes is now sort of delivering on.
Job, do you have a question?
Sure, I got a question for Dan. You had mentioned something just now about the CNCF stack and building on Kubernetes. You accepted Prometheus as the project, and it sounds like FluentD may be next. But what's the end game? Like down the road, will you have a complete kind of integrated stack, or what's going on there?
Sure. So I would say that I like to talk about the CNCF stacks because we don't. We have a really diverse and very bright group of folks on our technical oversight committee that adopts in new projects, but it's fairly rare for them to get unanimity on any area. And so I think I've used the metaphor that there's general agreement on what the roadmap is and what the destination that people are trying to get to, which is this concept of having a complete open source stack that you can deploy on any cloud or on bare metal. But we definitely think that there's different paths to get there. And so what we're suggesting is that there's a set of projects that we can show they all work together well, they meet customers' needs. Maybe some of them are extremely mature and well adopted, like Prometheus and Kubernetes, and then we are looking at having a new class of somewhat more immature projects that we can say, I think we're going to call them inception stage, to say, hey, these are incredibly promising, kind of cutting edge folks should consider this, but they don't quite have the adoption yet, and we're not quite sure what the winner's going to be in this space. Also on some areas like networking with Kubernetes, where there's not yet consensus between Flannel and Calco and Weave, we're talking about potentially trying to bring in multiple options and letting folks decide. But I mean, I think the end goal is that we would have these sets of stacks and folks could look at this and have real confidence that very serious companies like Comcast and many others are deploying these and they're working well in production and that they can pick these technologies and count on them that they're going to be reliable for years to come.
Another question. Oh, there's a question. Is there another question too? And we have another question in the table behind.
In that stack, there's also a missing layer of the OS. Any chance of getting like CoreOS Linux adopted into CNCF?
It's definitely not impossible, but today we've been focused higher up. And so, and even there, I mean, I think CoreOS is a fantastic platform for running Kubernetes and other cloud-native software, but it's not the only one. And so even if we did, we would still want to make sure that things work great on other Platinum members like RHEL, and you'll see some news about Canonical joining and others. And so, but I mean, I think CoreOS has really found a great, I wouldn't even call it niche, but specialty on saying this is a great OS for containers.
I wanted to make one more kind of point to your question. I realize that like bare metal seems to have it seems like it's avoided. Most people are focusing cloud, but we are out there. Like all of Comcast stuff for this project is bare metal. Like more than 5,000 servers will be rolling this out over the next year. So there are people who are doing this on bare metal and doing it on things other than CoreOS. So we're working on solving the problems, and I think that, you know, as Alex said, I mean, we're young. I mean, we're only a couple years into this, so I think to be as far as we are is exciting, and I think that we're going to continue to watch these problems get solved. Somebody did an estimate for how much money it would cost to get Kubernetes to where it is today. I think, was it you that did it?
I proposed the question that new stack, I think, did a thorough analysis of the amount it costs to get the Kubernetes ecosystem to where it is today.
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
It was I forget. It was like
it's like 120 million.
120 million. Yeah.
Yeah, not a very cheap piece of software. It's a pretty 120 million for 120 megabytes of a binary. Amazing. Love it.
And an extra 40 seconds of compile time for all your Go code.
Well, I mean, what's that mean? The question we're starting to ask is, how does that compare, right? How does that compare to other platforms out there? And like, what is the cost of those different platforms, and what do they cost? I mean, could you even start calculating the cost of? I mean, has anyone done a calculating of the cost of Linux over the years? I mean,
sure, you could just run a BigQuery query against it.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
All right, we have a question.
Hi, my name is Amit. I'm with Microsoft. Yesterday there was a hyper.sh announcement. I'm guessing some of you may have seen it. So I was wondering, one, how much is the appetite for short-lived containers, like Lambda-like containers, and their hosting in your companies and I guess CoreOS customers? And the second thing is, how much is the appetite for, like, are your customers, do they show any appetite in virtualization-based OCI implementations like Run V?
I can speak to this a little bit. In terms of virtualization, yes, definitely, because at the end of the day, virtualization and containers are completely different things. Virtualization is about how do you have a host that allows you to run another kernel in software on top of that physical host, or on top of that real host. It could be even nested virtualization. But a lot of people think that virtualization and containers are like replacing one another. No, it's about I want to run Windows on Linux, or I want to run a different version of a Linux kernel on top of a Linux kernel, or on top of an ESX kernel, or whatever. And yes, that is going to be around for a long time. We did a bunch of work just showing how this is possible around a project we called Stackinetes, which is OpenStack and Kubernetes coming together. People are like, what? Why would you do that? And it's because you need to think about Kubernetes as a system for managing applications. It's actually replacing, with containers, RPM and Deb, and with Kubernetes, Ansible, Chef, and Puppet, not replacing virtualization. And of course, there's some completely different characteristics to how these systems work, but that's what's being replaced at the end of the day. And so when we deploy OpenStack on Kubernetes, it's showing how you can package a hypervisor inside of a container, how you can do live migration between containers and a hypervisor, how you can do overlay networking on top of the underlying networking that's happening inside of Kubernetes. And we've seen a ton of interest around that because businesses still need virtualization. The cloud is built on virtualization. It's not going anywhere for a long time. Windows is embedded in tons of enterprises, and it's not going anywhere, and people would love to consolidate that onto one platform. So we definitely are seeing a lot of interest for virtualization. I'll let someone else talk about the other.
Andy, any thoughts on that?
I was just listening to what Alex was saying. There's definitely even people are trying to get as far as virtualization goes, are definitely trying to get that as close to. So containers gave like the kind of ultimate user experience. It was a super fast, very easy to define packaging material, and virtualization stuff is also sort of sees that as like a goalpost at this point. Suddenly now they're like, well, can we start a VM in under a second so that we can make this whole thing? We can virtualize the kernel, but we don't have to do the file system anymore. Things like this. They're figuring out what they can get away with and what they can't, so that they can do very interesting virtualization technology. So I think going forward, probably there's probably like that world will blur a bit. We're still going to need the heavyweight virtualization again for managing all your Windows servers on Linux hosts and things like this. But yeah, I guess those worlds I feel like are coming pretty close together. And then I just was also happy about the statement that containers are replacing things like RPM. I'm very happy for that. In that I've never been a very big fan of sort of it's a very obscure model the way all that stuff works, and it's pretty old.
I have a quick question. Who here flew in for this event from other parts of the country?
I hope you're all mail-in voters.
How many people came from overseas? How many from Europe? Asia? Right. I know we have one. Is anyone in the room younger than 20 years old? We have one here. I know he's a maintainer, and we talked to him beforehand, and we thought you might have a question for us, just because he's so knows it so well. Are there questions you have for this week, Lucas, that you'd like to you're thinking about when you're thinking about this week ahead? And introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Lucas Kjellström from Finland. I'm 17 years old and attending upper secondary school. And I've been a maintainer now for more than a half year for Kubernetes. And yeah, I think I'm like the 60th highest contributor for the main core project. And yeah, it has been really, really great and fun to do on my spare time. Also, yeah, I haven't attended any computing classes or something like that. It's just, my hobby besides soccer.
What direction would you like to see? What are some of the things where would you like to see Kubernetes go? What's the direction that you'd like to see?
I like it to be a lot more easier to set up. That's really important so more people can adapt and use Kubernetes. Right now it's extremely hard to set up a production cluster properly. And yeah, mainly that use case. And I think we're working hard on that in SIG cluster lifecycle, and anyone who's willing to contribute with us, that would be greatly appreciated.
Right. Erik, thank you very much. We just appreciate it. Erik, so how do you help ease the complexity internally at Comcast for people?
As far as administering the cluster? Or,
yeah.
So a lot of that is knowledge sharing. That I think that becomes the problem right now, is that we're so early that any one given team is going to have a minimal number of people with a lot of experience and knowledge, and it becomes even harder with any young technology. I mean, who here has 5 years of Kubernetes experience, right?
Yeah, no one.
So yeah, I mean, as much as we can share, and we watch the same thing happen in kind of the Go community. The more that we can do to produce content, videos, blog posts, share your stories, your problems, how you solve them, I think the more that we can spread the knowledge and watch teams grow and continue to expand.
Any last thoughts, guys? Andy, Alex, we're about to wrap up. Any last thinking on this week and what's ahead and what you're thinking about?
Yeah, I think this is a really big moment for the Kubernetes community. We've gotten to the point where essentially the base platform and infrastructure is getting relatively stable and reliable, and we can start thinking past just making the API boundary and kind of making the system work, and like now what is possible because these platforms are in place. It reminds me a lot of the there's now iOS or there's now Android. What is something you can go and build and do that you couldn't do before because this new platform exists? And I think we are in that point in time right now where we are crossing from make the platform work to go and build kind of the next, go build Uber or whatever is enabled because of the platform existing. I think you're going to see probably some of that this week, some of the kind of first glimpses of now what we can do because we have all this infrastructure in place, which we just simply didn't have, and we couldn't build these things, as of a year or two ago.
Andy?
Yeah, kind of on that same point. A long time ago when AWS first came out and we first had this idea of cloud VMs, people still just thought of them kind of as a desktop box somewhere far away. People were still designing their software and developing their software for the same thing as they would do if they had rented a colo server. They weren't taking advantage of any of the interesting features of what cloud allowed, which was this sort of ephemerality and things like this. It took multiple years for people to get to the point where people started actually designing software that took advantage of that. We're sort of, to Alex's point, we're at the same stage with Kubernetes now, right? So we're hitting this spot where people are like, great, we have a scheduler, let's just keep scheduling the same kinds of things. But we're just now getting to the point in Kubernetes where we're now starting to design things for schedulers. We're starting to design things so that we have this ability, knowing that that infrastructure will be there, knowing that we're going to have Kubernetes underneath us, we are able to design our software to take advantage of all that rather than from the beginning. Rather than just sort of taking existing workloads and dumping them on Kubernetes, which is still happening perfectly well. But once people stop designing for, say, Linux and start designing for Kubernetes, that's where the real new magic is going to start happening.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for showing up for the Pancake Breakfast today. Well, before we end, I'd like to just thank the sponsors, Cloud Native Computing Foundation, CoreOS, and Wercker. Let's give another big hand of applause for these guys. I'd like to thank Joe Jackson, managing editor of the New Stack, Norris Jean, who is doing the video and audio recording here, and Judy Williams, co-owner of the New Stack. Thank you. They're instrumental to this. We're having another Pancake Breakfast tomorrow. Same time, same location. It's the Pancake Elect Pancake Breakfast. So come join us tomorrow. Thanks again. Check out the ebook. We'll see you guys at the show.
We'd like to thank our sponsors from the Pancake Breakfast at CloudNativeCon in Seattle, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. Inspired by internet scale computing, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation advances the development of cloud native technology and services by creating a new set of common container technologies informed by technical merit and end user value. CoreOS. CoreOS has a mission to improve the security and reliability of the internet. Wercker, a Docker native CI/CD automation platform for Kubernetes and microservices deployments.